LinkedIn presents.
I'm Rufus Griscom, and this is The Next Big Idea. Today, your brain on music. In 1983, a 25-year-old kid went down into the basement of his Minnesota home and recorded an album. These days, of course, anyone with GarageBand could make a halfway decent song. But like I said, this was 83, the analog era. If you wanted drums, you had to play drums. If you wanted a guitar solo, well, you had to shred on your own. If you wanted to edit what you'd recorded, you couldn't just press a few keys on your keyboard. You had to use a razor blade to cut the tape and then splice it back together with Scotch tape. So the fact that this young guy had the technical chops, the musical abilities, and the initiative to record music was pretty impressive. What's truly remarkable, though, is that the music he made sounded like this. That's right. The 25-year-old kid was Prince. And he wasn't alone down there in the basement. He had a recording engineer with him, another 20-something, named Susan Rogers. A recording engineer is a master in the art of manipulating sound. They can take this, add some drums, mix in vocals, and you get That's Prince's 1985 hit Raspberry Beret, engineered by Susan Rogers. It's among the dozens of iconic songs the two of them made together in the 80s. Susan went on to have an illustrious career in the music biz. She worked with David Byrne, co-produced the Bare Naked Ladies smash hit 1 Week. These artists didn't turn to her because she was an expert at theory or some sort of musical virtuoso. She couldn't even play an instrument. What she could do was listen. She was able to open her ears, let sounds wash over her, and then push them around, brighten the vocals, say, or darken the drums, in a way that made whatever song she was listening to better. As her career advanced, Susan began to wonder what was going on neurologically when she listened. Where did her perceptions, reactions, and feelings come from? Why did she respond to music the way she did? Why does anyone? Those questions got so loud in her mind, and her need to answer them grew so strong that in her mid-40s, she quit making records and went back to school, ultimately earning a PhD in psychology. She's now a professor at Berklee College of Music and the author of a new book called This Is What It Sounds Like: What the Music You Love Says About You. It was chosen by our curators, Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant, Susan Cain, and Daniel Pink, as one of the 8 best nonfiction books published last year. Today's episode is a little different, and I think pretty special. Susan sat down with our producer and fellow music nerd, Caleb, and they were joined by Daniel Levitin, a previous guest on this show, one of my favorites. He's the author of the runaway New York Times bestseller, This Is Your Brain on Music. He was also Susan's PhD advisor. They talk about what music has meant to their lives, debate what makes a generic artist different from a great one, and best of all, share some of their favorite records.
Hi, I'm Kwame Christian, CEO of the American Negotiation Institute, and I have a quick question for you. When was the last time you had a difficult conversation? These conversations happen all the time, and that's exactly why you should listen to Negotiate Anything, the #1 negotiation podcast in the world. We produce episodes every single day to help you lead, persuade, and resolve conflicts both at work and at home. So level up your negotiation skills by making Negotiate Anything part of your daily routine.
Susan, take us back to 1983. You are in your 20s, you're living in LA, and you get a call from, I think, an ex-boyfriend, and he tells you about a job opportunity. What happened next?
I was working for Crosby, Stills and Nash in Hollywood as their studio maintenance tech, keeping the studio running. And I get this phone call from my friend at Westlake Audio, and he said in his thick Boston accent, "Sue, your dream job is waiting for you. Prince is looking for a technician." Well, that was great because Prince was my favorite artist in the world. I was a technician, and I thought that job was meant for me. I was interviewed and I got the gig and I moved, left everyone I'd ever known, left California, went to work for Prince in 1983. He was just wrapping up the 1999 tour. He had gotten the green light to do the Purple Rain movie, and he'd already started work on a Purple Rain album, and it was a very exciting time. He had just turned 25 years old, and I had just turned 27. So we were all pretty young at that time.
It's amazing. And so you ended up collaborating with Prince on the Purple Rain record, and I think you two worked together almost through the entirety of the 80s, right? Into sort of 87, 88?
Yeah, we were together. It was just a little over 4 years, but we packed 20 years worth of work into that time because he was so prolific. Dan, I'm seeing you have a question.
I'm holding up my hand, teacher. I've known a lot of maintenance engineers, and I can't think of a single one who transitioned to being a first engineer. How did that happen? I mean, usually the maintenance engineer isn't supposed to have an opinion about the artistic side of things, not even supposed to have an opinion about which mic to use or where to place it. That would just be really gauche. And so at some point, though, he must have intuited, the great one must have intuited that you had some skill outside of your job description.
Oh, thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that. That's exactly what happened. Maintenance technicians stay in their lane. They are people who repair the equipment, and they're in the studio when everyone else is gone. But Prince transitioned me from that role of being his maintenance tech into being his engineer. It's well known that Prince just didn't like to talk a lot, and he sure as hell didn't make a lot of small talk. So if he had someone he was familiar with in the room who already knew all the signal flow, why not just have that person stay on the job and just carry on? And the first time he asked me to set up a microphone, I asked him, where shall I place it? It was a small home studio, but I didn't know where he wanted it. There was no ISO room. And I said, where would you like me to put it? And he said, in front of my mouth. Okay, that's how this is going to go. All right, I see. And then the subtext there was, figure it out. Don't ask me everything. That's how you had to be with him.
A lot of people just make records. You create sonic environments. You create soundscapes. You create entire auditory worlds. And you don't do that just by sticking a microphone in front of someone's mouth.
Yeah, that's exactly true. Everyone who makes a record, producer, engineer, mixer, artist, we say that they each have their own sonic signature. And what that means is, just like what a painter does with oil on canvas, you're pushing sound around to get it to behave in a way that strikes you as good. The great record producer Greg Wells came to Berkeley a few years ago, and he said to the kids, he said, you guys sitting here today, you have no idea how good is. Good is ridiculously good. But we all have our own customized notion of what's perfect, what's just right for a sound, for a mix, for depth of field, for staging in a record. Do you want this record to be realistic, or do you want this record to send the listener's mind somewhere else? So, yeah, you develop your sonic signature, and frankly, I think there's not that much you can do about it in terms of forcing yourself to paint like someone else. You've got your own internal artistry, so your sonic signature is going to find a way to express itself, for better and for worse, in everything you do.
I love that phrase Dan just used, sonic environments. And you have this sort of 20-year arc of creating sonic environments, first with Prince and then with other artists like David Byrne and the Bare Naked Ladies. And then at age 44, you head off in a surprising different direction.
It had been coming for a little while. I entered my career as a record maker because I felt kind of a calling, and my mind, my fantasizing mind, was always imagining being in the studio. I pictured the players and the performers, and it's a really good life when your body can be where your mind is, when your fantasies can come to life. And I was able to make that happen in the music business. I fantasized about being in the studio, and I was able to put myself there. In my late 30s, my fantasies began changing, and began thinking, I think I would really enjoy staring through the lenses of a microscope, or looking at spreadsheets of data and exploring questions about the natural world. By the time I was in my early 40s, it became really clear that I really wanted a life as a scientist. I wanted to be in a laboratory. So once again, I had to figure out a way to get my body to be where my mind was.
And it's just remarkable. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you finish your high school degree, finish your undergraduate degree, and then enroll in a PhD program. And all of that begins in your mid-40s.
Yeah, exactly. I had dropped out of high school when I was a teenager and got married, and that was kind of ill-fated. But once I got past all that, I did have to do that. I went from being a professional record maker for over 22 years to earning a GED first off, getting into the University of Minnesota, going to McGill, doing 8 straight years of college, and getting that PhD.
Incredible. Okay, so now it's I think, early 2000s. You're at McGill. You're studying with Dr. Daniel Levitin. And Dan, where are you at this point? I think it's maybe 04, 05. You're working on a book at this point, aren't you?
Yeah. So, in an interesting parallel, I had been in the music business, not reaching nearly the heights or the cleverness or artistry that Susan had, but I'd been kicking around in it until I was 34. When I was 34, I decided to go, actually 35, I decided to go and get my PhD. And so this kindred spirit, I certainly knew Susan's work. We had never met. Everybody knew Susan's engineering work and her work with Prince and admired it. And so I don't remember whether you called or emailed, but you somehow got in touch and asked if I would take you on as a student. And it was a bad time for me to take a student because I didn't yet have tenure. And having students usually takes time away from publishing. And you have to publish a certain amount of papers to get tenure. And also, an editor had reached out to me and asked if I would write a book about music and the brain, which eventually became This Is Your Brain on Music. But I was way behind. I procrastinated, and I had like 7 months to write this whole book. But when you came along, I thought this was kismet. And I just wanted to have the opportunity to work with you. And from my perspective, it wasn't so much as me as a teacher. It was us as collaborators from the start, figuring out research projects that interested us both.
Yeah, and I felt that compatibility from the very beginning. In fact, the reason I chose your lab was that I thought, this guy, he's been in the music business. He'll know what I know, and he'll know how to tap into some knowledge or experience that I might have that can help out in scientific investigation. Dan, I get asked this question, and I bet you do a lot too. Sometimes people want to know, if you're exploring the human brain music connection, doesn't it kind of dilute the mystery of music? Doesn't it cause you to maybe not like it as much? I don't know about you, but I think I know what the answer is. For me personally, my love for music has never gone away. And the more I've learned about what the brain is doing while it's processing music, the more I love it even more, because you think about all those 100 billion neurons and an infinite variety of connections, and there's all these circuits There are nuclei, and you put on a record, and you got a pattern of neural activation going on up there in your brain. This pattern of neural activation. Think of all the responses you have to it. Think of the visualizations. Your mind can start to fantasize, and think about the way your body can move to it. Think about the emotions. Of course, that's what music is optimized for. The feelings that you have, the thoughts you have, the fantasies you have, and the many, many ways you just get rewarded from that. And could there be a more delightful mystery to explore? I don't think so.
I think it's really like learning anything. I I remember being 4 years old and seeing people play the piano, and they just sort of seemed to move their hands up and down in what looked to me like a random order. And I finally sat at a piano and I did that, and it sounded terrible. And, they're not just doing anything; they're doing something in particular, and it's not just that; it's woodworking. I mean, you see somebody use a table saw and a drill press, and they make a cabinet that seems very simple, but then you realize, oh, there is a lot to this, and this could become a life's work. And understanding it doesn't make it any less interesting. In fact, for me, it's always been like a game of whack-a-mole, where just when I think I've understood one mystery, 5 more pop up, and they're more fascinating than the last.
Yeah, there are so many mysteries involved in music in the brain. To me, though, the most exciting one to think about is that love at first listen experience. How that happens is so extraordinary to me, but it does happen. You put a record on, or someone plays something for you, or you're out there in the world and you hear something for the first time that stops you in your tracks and makes you think, this is what I'm talking about.
What's the first record that did that to you?
The very first, it may have been, there were a lot right around the same time. It may have been Papa's Got a Brand New Bag by James Brown. Those horns come in, and the guitar. It lifted me up above Motown. Motown's great, and I loved Motown and those R&B and soul records. It was all fine, but I kind of had the sneaking suspicion that there was something else out there that might be just a little bit more suited to my ear. I didn't know any of this, but I just had that feeling like this is good, but ... And then when I heard Papa's Got a Brand New Bag by James Brown, I realized, oh yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing I was missing. What record did that for you?
Well, I have to answer it in 2 phases. And by the way, for people who are listening to us here on The Next Big Idea, so much of what we're talking about is in your book. And I tell people who say, oh, I haven't read your book, This Is Your Brain on Music. And I say, don't. You ought to read Susan's book.
Oh, no. No, you got to read them in order. Dan's book first.
No. Yours just captures so much of the... it's a more personal way of thinking about music listening, but still has all of the science in it. It's an extraordinary achievement. At any rate, I'm going to dither a bit because there are 2 answers. There's the first record I remember hearing as a really young kiddo and being just enamored of it. And it was Frank Duvall's orchestra playing the Syncopated Clock, if you know that record. It's from the 40s, and it's kind of a novelty record. It had this great melody, but then I think the next record that really grabbed me at love at first listen was Rolling Stones. There was a cluster of songs, Paint It Black, Ruby Tuesday, Satisfaction, all came out around the same time, or at least in my memory they did, and they grabbed me. But interestingly, this love at first sight that you're fascinated with, I'm fascinated with the opposite. of cases where I really did not like something and resisted it, and then it became one of my favorite things. I remember hearing Magical Mystery Tour. And I thought, oh, that just sounds really weird. I don't ever want to hear that band again. And then I put together, well, that's the same band that sang I Want to Hold Your Hand, and I never wanted to hear that again. And I had then, some years later, in 1973, I heard Steely Dan's Countdown to Ecstasy.
I remember the 35 sweet goodbyes.
And I thought, ugh, I never want to hear that singer again. And it was a strange thing because both of those artists, Steely Dan and the Beatles, it took a while, but they became among my favorites. I can't explain how I can reconcile that with my Rolling Stones and my Frank Duvall experience, because I love those just as much as I ever did.
But disliking, a strong dislike, is still a hedonistic response, a strong response where you say, I'm feeling something, and it's in the negative direction. But it's closer, I think, to love than to just, meh. The reaction of this does absolutely nothing for me. At least you preheated the oven when you're hearing something that you really dislike. And you can, I think, as you're describing, you can transition from I dislike this into I like it. I want to share something with you that I just learned about the other day. So I was on a podcast, and the host, Brett McKay, on the Art of Manliness podcast, had a confession. He really liked Muzak. Elevator music. And I said, we've got to talk about this because I've never heard of anyone liking this music. This music is deliberately designed to be ignored. It's written and composed and arranged and performed to be not liked, not attended to. How do you like this music? And he said, well, I confess part of it is nostalgia, but he said, I really listened to it a few times. And I realized, you know what? I think I kind of like it. I love how when we get older, it's delightful when the list of things we hate can get shorter. That's a really good thing. And ever since Brett told me this about liking Muzak, now I'm going to listen to it with fresh ears. And I'm going to see, are there any treats in there? Is there any way of discovering something that's maybe appealing to me? I assume that that's what your brain did with both Steely Dan and with others. You were the Beatles. You were open-minded enough to say, whoa, there must be something here. If I just listen a little longer and a little deeper, if I just give it another shot, I might hear what many others hear.
I wasn't open-minded, but because it was being played so much around me, it insinuated itself. And my brain started processing it. And I think what was going on was that there were just sounds and moves that my brain wasn't used to. Mm-hmm. And just through passive listening, it worked it out and then made sense of it. And I think all this underscores the old saying that the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference.
Right.
I was never indifferent about those.
Yeah. I like the quote from the biologist P.B. Medawar, who said the human brain treats a new stimulus the way a human body treats a new protein. Initially, you reject it. It's new, it's novel. You reject it because you think that it is not familiar enough and I don't want to approach this object. But if you see that others are approaching the object and it's working out really well for them, they're actually really fond of it, then you can sometimes overcome your timidity. Give it another shot, and eventually you may open up those circuits that allow you to receive a little hit of dopamine or opiates that would cause you to say, you know what? That actually felt pretty good. That wasn't a bad experience after all. I'm going to move this stimulus from the category of hate it over to the category of, well, it's not bad. And then eventually that can turn into love.
You know, what's interesting about that music, that guy who loves music, and I'm imagining him like intentionally going to the nearby Marriott and just riding the elevator up and down so he can listen to Girl from Ipanema instrumental. But it actually brings up this point about place and music, right? That the thing about music is it's meant to, you encounter it in these sort of innocuous environments, in an elevator, in a shopping mall. But I'm wondering about the ways in which, where you first encounter a song, who you're with, what you're doing. Are you listening to it on vinyl, sitting around a table? Are you listening on headphones alone in a dark room? How does that influence that love at first listen, that sense of place and maybe community you're with?
Good point. Context always matters. And the great songwriters, Bob Dylan, or any of the other great ones, will describe being under the influence when they were 4, 5, 6 years old of music that was on the radio. So imagine this. Let's say you're 4 years old and you're in the car and you're going with your family. Maybe you're going to Disneyland, or you're going to grandma's house for Thanksgiving, and you feel great. You feel great. You're safe. You're taken care of. You're loved. A happy thing. It's going to happen. Everyone's getting along. And the radio is there, and a certain song comes on at that moment. You're automatically going to encode those feel-good neurotransmitters that are coursing through your system with that pattern of activity that corresponds to that song. Little bits of bonding can happen in that moment. You might not be consciously aware of that song. You might not have a memory of it. But imagine years later, you hear that song on the radio. It has the potential to trigger just a wee little release of a little bit of feel-good neurotransmitters that can help you feel better in the moment. And you think to yourself, I like this song. As we say in the arts, though, everything influences you. Everything influences you. So, of course, you're going to be influenced by the music in your environment during both happy, angry, sad, and all kinds of emotional experiences. Every song you hear is filtered through every song you've ever heard in your life.
Coming up, Susan explains why novelty can make a song better, and Dan describes the traits that make a true musician and a true writer. We'll be right back.
Hey, I'm Michael Kovnat, host of The Next Big Idea Daily. The show is a masterclass in better living from some of the smartest writers around. Every morning, Monday through Friday, we'll serve up a quick 10-minute lesson on how to strengthen your relationships, supercharge your creativity, boost your productivity, and more. Follow The Next Big Idea Daily wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey folks, Rufus here. If you're a fan of our interviews with physicians, scientists, or entrepreneurs, then I have the perfect podcast recommendation for you, Raising Health. Previously called BioEats World, Raising Health comes from leading venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z. Each episode, Raising Health dives deep into the heart of healthcare, biotech, and AI with A16Z General Partners. Along the way, they explore the real challenges and opportunities in health and biotech entrepreneurship. Not to mention, you'll hear raw insights and actionable advice from notable guests like Omada CEO and co-founder Sean Duffy, and AI expert and In-Sitro CEO Daphne Kohler. Don't miss out. Follow Raising Health wherever you get your podcasts.
So you went to gradual school, and you worked on research. You want to talk a little bit about that?
So my doctoral thesis was concerned with the origins of the distinction between consonance and dissonance. Why are some chords considered to be perfect and others are considered diabolus in musica, the devil? What does the brain care? Does the brain make a difference, a distinction between those two? I looked at that, and I looked at auditory short-term memory. And as we talked about earlier, all it did was deepen the mystery. So unusual things cause our brains to hang on to them a little bit longer in some cases because we need to figure out what was that. So for songwriters and musicians who might be listening, when you use an unusual chord kind of chord you don't hear every day, when you throw in an unexpected inversion, when you put in something that we weren't expecting to have happen, our brains are going to be motivated to automatically think, whoa, 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 wait a minute, what was that now? And you won't think that consciously necessarily, but your brain is hanging on to that object a little bit longer. If that happens too often, it becomes aversive. That music just becomes too novel, too cognitively taxing. But if it can happen once or twice in the course of a nice pop song, you're intrigued and interested enough. So it did inform my thinking of music and music listening.
Your command of the research literature is enviable, and your ability to express yourself in writing is just superb. You can close your ears, but I'll tell the audience, Susan manages to be very rigorous and accurate with the science, but in a way that doesn't make it seem like you're reading about science. It's very conversational and fun and engaging.
Dan, thank you for the praise, but don't forget, you're the one who taught me.
You didn't need a whole lot of teaching.
You had those writing labs where we would practice writing, and still to this day, I fantasize when I read something that's really, really great. I fantasize, wow, I wish I had been able to write that well when I was in Dan's lab. It's a learning process.
I have the same feeling. I read other writers and I go, wow, I want a little bit of that. I think, a true writer, like a true musician, you're never really happy with what comes out. There are constraints of practicality and deadlines, and don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. But it's why Dylan almost never sings the lyrics exactly the same way. I don't think it's that he's forgetting them. I think that he's reimagining, well, if I had it to do over again.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to put this on the table for us to riff on. The other day, I listened to two new albums, new to me. They're fairly recent, back to back, because I discovered these new artists that I like. One is Curtis Harding, who I instantly loved. The record came out in 2017. That's the one I listened to. I love Curtis Harding. I followed that with an artist named Sun Little, also a fairly recent record. And they were both good. Now, because I was listening on Apple Music, as soon as I finished playing those records, it just automatically called up a playlist and added, well, okay, you like that, so here's some music you're probably going to like too. And it played just artist after artist after artist, and all in the same R&B, modern R&B vein. And when I liked something, I'd go over and look at it and say, oh, okay, I'm remembering the name of that artist. But here's what it got me thinking. There was one artist in particular who's got a voice that's very similar to Beyonce. Very similar. Her vocal timbre, her style, very similar to Beyonce. But she's not Beyonce. And when I would go to look at it, asking myself, is this Beyonce? It doesn't sound quite up to her level. I'd go and look and I'd see that, no, indeed, it was not Beyonce. It made me think about music and its similarities with fashion. So you go shopping for clothes, you get yourself into a Macy's or a Kohl's or wherever it is people go for clothes, and you go shopping and you see nice things and you say, okay, this'll work. This is good. This stuff will work for me. And you buy it and you take it home. But if you've got an important job or an event or something, you're going to kick it up a notch and you're going to go to Saks Fifth Avenue or someplace that's a little bit nicer and spend a little bit more money. When you look at the clothes at Saks Fifth Avenue, they're nicer. They're better. It's better materials. It's better made. It's more expensive. It's better style. But there's a noticeable difference in the quality. Then, should you find yourself pretty flush and you want to get yourself to Burberry's or Louis Vuitton or anything like that, you're going to find clothing that's even more expensive and better. It seems to me that now with the advent of our tools and with people able to self-publish their own music, we've got more music than ever before out there. And 99.5% of what I listened to yesterday, over 6-7 hours of constant music listening, was okay. It was Macy's, and some pieces were Saks Fifth Avenue worthy. I don't think a lot of people recognize that the music that's at the top of our Billboard charts is made by quite a few really smart and skilled people. Those pieces don't rise to the top of the charts by accident.
I'm glad you brought this up because I have a different, but I believe complementary perspective. So certainly the people who succeed and have more than just say one hit, the people who have a career,
Mhm.
they are really talented and they work really hard and the quality tends to be very high. Not in every single case, but tends to be. But that doesn't mean that having that much talent and care and quality will get you to the top. It doesn't work that way at all. For every Eric Clapton, there are 1,000 guitarists who are as good as Eric himself says this, as good, as creative, as innovative, but you just don't hear them. They haven't passed through the turnstiles of the music business, or maybe they don't have it together enough to show up and sign the contract or whatever. Maybe they don't have the fire in their belly to do what's necessary. But complementary to that, I think, is the Beyonce sound-alike problem, which is that in general, the people that make it to the top don't sound like anyone else. And as soon as you hear them, you go, that is something different. So if somebody comes along who sounds like Beyonce, or sounds like Adele, or sounds like Jay-Z, we already have those artists. We don't need a sound alike. We want somebody who's new. And, in our generation, Susan, when Springsteen came along, or Tom Petty, there was nothing like that.
And Tom Petty had no choice but to sound like Tom Petty. And we now live in a world where, with the advent of digital recording technology, it's very easy to make yourself sound like Tom Petty. Oh, I want to get that exact guitar sound. I can do that in Pro Tools. Oh, I want my voice I want to change how I hit that note. I can auto-tune that. And I'd love for you, Susan, and for both of you to talk a little bit about how the advent of that technology has changed the game, maybe for better, maybe for worse.
Yeah, let's go back to the clothing analogy. Man, think about 150, 200 years ago. Only select few could afford well-made, tailored clothing, and nearly everyone just not only sewed together burlap bags or flour sacks or whatever it was they did in order to have something to wear. With the advent of new technology and society's advance, now there's mass-produced clothing. Everybody's got clothing. And likewise, everyone has the tools in order to make music, and many of them are making music. What this has done is, in part, it's changed our concept of what music is, and it's becoming a little bit less of a refined art and more of just a practical utility in our lives. This is going to, by necessity, change music's form a little bit. Producers will be making records that are a little bit more utilitarian than art-based in nature. And that's progress, and it's going to go the way that it goes. What do you think about that, Dan?
I think about the kind of paintings that you see in a Holiday Inn or a Best Western or something on the walls. They're kind of generic. And so it's easy enough now to make those kinds of things, but real artists are still going to try and do something that is different and that takes some time and some design. And so on the one hand, I'm thrilled that more people can make music. I love the idea that the average person doesn't now have to spend 20 years learning to play a musical instrument before they can have fun. And of course, that's what punk was all about, right? It was, I just want to bang something, So the idea that millions more people now can make music right out of the box, I think is great. The only problem we have that we didn't have before is you'll relate to this, Susan, a signal to noise problem. There's so much more to choose from. It used to be that if you bought something on Warner Brothers, you didn't know if you liked it, but you knew the quality would be good. You could trust that the Warner Brothers imprint, or any number of imprints, meant something. Columbia meant something. Columbia was the label home of Dylan and Springsteen and Billy Joel.
Frank Sinatra.
Sinatra and Aretha Franklin, Simon and Garfunkel. It meant something. Now, the way we consume music, it's all sort of in a big lotto bin, and you're pulling out one number at a time and hoping that you get a winning number. Mm-hmm. So that part's harder, and we have to figure out how to fix that. It's more on the distribution side, but I really do believe that it hasn't changed the way creative people work or think, because they're the ones who don't want to do what's done before. Prince did not want to just do what somebody had done before. Can you imagine Prince playing in a cover band in a Holiday Inn? That's not him.
I've seen Prince play in a Holiday Inn, and I've heard him do cover versions, so I can kind of imagine it. Yeah, another thing that's missing in this great equation is A&R, artist and repertoire. If you're signed to a record label, as you had to be in the old days, there was an A&R person, like an editor at a publishing house, that honed your work and got it ready for the spotlight of attention. These days, many people are just self-publishing, so to speak, and they don't have that person to dress up their work and get it. The term I like to use is record ready. Artist development has disappeared, and a lot of folks are making a record, but they're not necessarily record ready just yet. You're right, though. Artists will always be creative, and listeners will always seek melody, will always seek rhythm, will always love harmony, will always respond to clever lyrics. Music isn't going to become unrecognizable anytime soon.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, Susan and Dan share their favorite songs. We put a lot of love into these episodes. And when I say we, I mean my producer, Caleb. And when I say love, I mean he uses a digital scalpel to excise all of my ums and ahs, my stumbles and stammers. That's right, folks. I'm not as naturally silver-tongued as these episodes would have you believe. A lot of the time, I sound like this. So this personal, I'm going to start that again. I am grateful for all the work Caleb does to make me sound better. And if you are too, one way you can show that gratitude is by downloading the Next Big Idea app. There you'll find ad-free versions of this podcast, hundreds of book summaries written and read by the world's leading nonfiction authors, a new one every single day. Plus, there are masterclass-style video e-courses and exclusive conversations with our curators, Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant, Susan Cain, and Daniel Pink. All of this content is beautifully edited by our entire team, and these folks, well, they like to be paid. So your support is deeply appreciated. Getting smart fast has never sounded so good. Search for the Next Big Idea in your app store today.
Speaking of records, do you have a favorite record you would play for me and talk me through?
I got an awful lot of favorite records, but if we were going to play something that illustrated our own listener profile, I can go right to Al Green's Call Me, Come Back Home. My favorite drummer in the whole world, the late Al Jackson Jr., is playing drums on this. And that big deep dish snare and where it hits, the evenness of his dynamics, Al's crooning up there on top, Teeny Hodges on guitar. This record is my idea of perfection.
What a beautiful time we had together. Now it's getting late and we must leave each other. Yeah. Just remember.
Oh, and the end, when it goes to the breakdown at the end, oh, just so strong. I could listen to that guitar every single day and never tire of it. I love how the strings are high and the background vocals are high and Al's voice is high. And then that snare is deep. I love the vertical sonority of it. Of course, I love nearly every aspect of it. It doesn't do everything for me, but that's the whole point of having a listener profile with a lot of sweet spots on it. Some of your records are going to please you for their sound, and some will please you for their lyrics, and some will please you for their groove. If you can hit more than one sweet spot, as this record does, you've got a record you love for life. What's your choice? What would you like to play?
I have a rather odd choice because it's not a record. I met a guy who's now my friend named Jeff Silbar. And Jeff is a songwriter, and I enjoyed his company. I didn't know much about his songwriting. And then I found out that he had written a song that became a very, very big hit called Wind Beneath My Wings. Now, in ASCAP's ranking of the most performed songs ever, number 1 is Happy Birthday. Number 2 is My Girl, followed by White Christmas and Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. Number 5 is Wind Beneath My Wings.
Wow.
That is a big song. And it's a song I had mostly ignored. And because I apologize to anybody who feels otherwise, but musical taste is very personal. I found the Bette Midler version cheesy and overdone, and maybe it was authentic to Bette, but it wasn't what I wanted to hear. And there are a few other big production versions of it. But I really like Jeff, and I like the other songs he had written, which are more in the Guy Clark or Bruce Springsteen, Nebraska, one voice, one guitar, that kind of place, which for me, for my listener profile is authenticity. And so I found, well, I guess it's a recording, but it's not a record, of Jeff doing this live. And this was how he intended the song to be. This is the songwriter of Wind Beneath My Wings playing it the way he wrote it and the way he intended it. And then all the other stuff came later. And when I heard that, my jaw dropped. I had no idea it was such an amazing song. And so it's really the opposite case where production gets in the way of the song, and you hear it here, I hope.
Did you ever know that you are my hero? And you're everything I'd like to be.
That is an interesting question that record producers have to consider. So you've got the chord changes, you've got the melody, you've got the words. What's the best form this raw material can take to connect with people?
'Cause you are the wind beneath my wings.
Now, someone wants to tell you something, and they want to show you how passionate they are, how much they believe this, and they can practically shout it to you. They can give you a giant Valentine's card or balloons or flowers. Believe me, I'm crazy about you. A big statement. Okay, great. I guess you really mean it. Or they can get quiet and they can say in all sincerity, from deep in the chest, do you know how much I care?
And
Okay.
they can whisper it in your ear instead of shouting it over a bullhorn.
Right. Now, the dilemma, of course, is we got to sell records. Larger productions are more likely to attract a lot of people. People who don't, and there are many of them, who don't pay a lot of attention to music. And sometimes you do have to make a big gesture, an ornate gesture, in order to get heard. So good for Bette Midler. It worked. She had a huge hit. Good for Jeff, in that he's able to express the genesis of the feeling that gave rise to those chord changes and that melody and those words.
Do you know the engineer Gabe Veltri?
No.
Gabe hadn't heard of Silbar, but I played him this. And of course, he thought he knew the song when I said the title. And he said, I had no idea that that's what this song was. And he said, what if there are millions of people who feel the way Gabe and you and I and Caleb feel about that soft whispering version? They feel that way about the big production version, right? They hear the intimacy and the beauty, and they only hear it in the big version, and we only hear it in the stripped down version. That kind of put it in perspective for me. It's different strokes for different folks.
And how you need music to function for you. I don't know this firsthand, but I'm told that a lot of people like that the Bette Midler version of the record to be played at their weddings. It's a big
Oh,
thing
yeah.
at
Yeah.
weddings
And anniversaries.
yes,
Yeah.
and that's the big statement that would
Yeah.
feel pretty inappropriate if it were the smaller statement. It would be used differently. The smaller statement is
I feel
used
like
in
it wasn't
private.
enough.
Yeah, it's used in private. So it's an important distinction, I think, when we think about music, is to consider how its form serves its function. What do you want this record to do when it gets out there in the world? Good for Jeff that what this record did was make him an awful lot of money. That's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Daniel Levitin, Susan Rogers, it's just been amazing. I could listen to the two of you talk all day. You're like the Lennon McCartney of music cognition. It's just been fantastic. Thanks for sharing your
Or
thoughts.
the Richards and Jagger and Richards. I had it in the wrong order, but yeah, the Jagger and Richards.
Yes.
Long may they reign. And by the way, let me say, every time I talk with you, I'm always, I've got my antennae fully extended because I still.
Oh, you're my favorite Martian.
Yes, I still learn so much from you. You're
I
so
feel the same way.
good at what you do, and I admire the hell out of you. So thank you for taking time this morning to do this for us.
I feel the same way about you, Susan.
Well, thank you.
That was Susan Rogers, author of the new book, This Is What It Sounds Like, speaking with Daniel Levitin and Caleb Bissinger. Susan recently made a beautiful video e-course about her book, and it's only available in the Next Big Idea app. To access it, all you have to do is go to your app store and search for The Next Big Idea. And once you've got the app downloaded, you'll also be able to listen to an ad-free version of Dan's previous appearance on this podcast. That episode is called Successful Aging: How to Live a Full, Long Life. One of my favorite conversations. What are your favorite songs? I'd love to know. If you want to share them, sign up for our newsletter on LinkedIn and leave a comment in the post for this episode. The newsletter is called The Next Big Idea, and you can find it by searching for me, Rufus Griscom. That's Griscom on LinkedIn. Speaking of LinkedIn, we recently launched a new podcast with the great folks at the LinkedIn Podcast Network. The show is called The Next Big Idea Daily. Every day, in just minutes, you'll get a masterclass in better, smarter living from the world's best writers. Follow it wherever you listen to podcasts. Today's episode was written and produced by Caleb Bissinger, sound designed by Mike Toda. The Next Big Idea is produced in partnership with LinkedIn Presents. I'm your host, Rufus Griscom. See you next week.